Hi everyone, it's Christina from the DIYmommy.com, and today I want to show you how to sew this dress for fall. I am so excited to be doing a collab with Lisa of Farmhouse on Boone today. We each sewed the same dress pattern. This is the Darling Ranges dress from Megan Nielsen Designs, and we are each putting our own spin on it. So after you watch my video, make sure to head on over to Lisa's video and see how she made her dress. I used some fabric that I found on Spoonflower. You can buy it off Etsy, and this is a designer called Esther Fallon Lau, and she made this beautiful floral fabric. I love it. I got kind of a silky version of this fabric, and I love that I'm able to support an independent pattern maker and an independent fabric designer by sewing this dress. I'm also excited today because Megan Nielsen is giving you a discount on this pattern if you want to try and go ahead and sew this dress as well. So check out the link in the description box below if you want to get a deal on purchasing your own pattern. I'm really happy mostly with how this dress fit. As I go along in this tutorial, I'll share with you some of the things that maybe I would have changed or I will change for next time when I sew this dress. So let's get started. So I downloaded the Megan Nielsen Darling Ranges pattern, and I actually sent the large version of the pattern to Staples and had them printed on engineering paper, which is a lot easier than printing it at home on 8.5 by 11 sheets and taping it all together. So if you can, definitely do that. And then I just cut all the pieces that I needed from the pattern with my scissors. I am making a size large, which was pretty much the perfect size for me. And this pattern comes in everything from size extra small to extra large. So this is the fabric I'm using. It is a polyester satin sort of fabric, and I really liked the flow of it for a dress, and I just loved the pattern as well. Then I laid out all of my pattern pieces that I cut out roughly onto my fabric. In the pattern directions, it shows you a couple different cutting layouts depending on the width of your fabric, so I just went ahead and used that as my guide and then cut out all the pieces that I needed. So I cut out everything for version 1 of this dress, which is the dress version that's on the cover of the pattern. So it's just a simple dress with buttons all the way down the front and some 3/4 length sleeves. And I just cut out the size large for all of my pieces. Something that I really like to do when I'm sewing garments is I like to serge all the way around every single piece that I cut out immediately, and this creates a nice finished edge right away on all of my pieces. So if you don't have a serger, you can go ahead and use a regular sewing machine and zigzag around all of the raw edges of your fabric. Especially if I'm using a fabric that can fray really well, this is a great way to make everything look really, really nice and finished on my final garment. So now I'm working on the bodice piece, and I'm marking the darts for the front bodice. So I just used my pattern and laid it on top of the piece that I had cut out already and serged around the edges, and then used some stick pins, and I'm marking the dart. So this dart's going to help shape that front nicely to my bust. And then I'm using my sewing machine, the regular stitch, which I think is length number 3 on my sewing machine, making sure to back stitch at the beginning and the end of this dart seam and sewing everything together. I'm not going to show you every single time I use my sewing machine here in this sew along because this video would be like 30 minutes, 40 minutes long. So from now on, I'm just going to show you the steps that I'm taking, and you know now what machine that I'm using. So I sewed the darts on both pieces of the front of my bodice just like this, and here is the back piece of my bodice that I cut out right here, and I'm just unfolding it. Next, I'm laying the front pieces of my bodice onto the back pieces and lining up the shoulder seams and the side seams. Then I went ahead and pinned those, and I sewed those with a 5/8 seam allowance with my regular sewing machine. So now the shoulders and the sides of my bodice are sewn together. Next, I took my skirt pieces and I laid the pockets on them right sides together about 3 inches from the top of each side of my skirt pieces. So I did this for the front of the skirt, and then I also went and did this for the sides of the skirt. I think one of my most favorite things about this pattern is that this dress does have pockets, and it's really, really fabulous to have that extra feature. It's a little bit of extra work to add the pockets in, but definitely worth it in the end dress. And then you're just going to sew the pockets to the pieces of the skirt, and then you're going to sew the skirt together on the side seams. So you sew down the side seams and then all along the pocket as well, and this creates the side of the skirt. And then I made sure my pockets were flipped towards the front. And then I just sewed a really long running stitch all the way across the top of my skirt, and then I pulled one of the threads, and this creates a gather on the top of your skirt. This is a really easy way to create a gather. There's also ruffling feet that you can buy for your sewing machine to do this automatically, but usually I just sew a really long stitch, so that's a number 4 on my sewing machine, and then grab one of the threads of the stitch and then pull that to make the gather. So I'm just doing a really rough gather at first, and then I'm laying the bodice out like this, and then trying to match up and alter my gather by hand to match the length of my bodice. So basically when you do this, you want the side seams to line up, and then you want the ends of the skirt and the ends of the bodice to line up as well. And then once everything is lined up, I'm putting my skirt right side up and then my bodice right side down, and then I'm just making sure the side seams are lined up and I'm pinning everything together. So just pinning the beginning and the end of the skirt and the bodice, and then making sure that the seams are matched up. And then after I pin it, I just sew it all together with my regular sewing machine with a 5/8 seam allowance, and now my bodice is attached to my skirt. So next I'm working on the sleeve, so I sewed a running stitch along the top to make a little gather or an ease, and then I turned them in half and sewed along the side seam. Next I'm flipping them right side out and then putting them inside the dress like this, so right side of the sleeve is touching the right side of my dress, and then I'm pinning the sleeves in place. So I just make sure that the side seams of my dress match the side seams of the sleeve and pinning that, and then making sure the top center of my sleeve matches the top seam of my dress and pinning that. And then that running stitch that I sewed along the top of the sleeve, I'm just pulling that string again to very slightly gather the sleeve so that it fits the dress. So the sleeves are kind of a little bit puffy, they had a bit of an ease there. And then I sew the sleeves to the dress with a regular 5/8 seam allowance on my sewing machine. So that's how the sleeves look when they're sewn into the dress. I really like that these ones are 3/4 length, so really perfect for the fall season. Now I am making a bias tape, so I cut some fabric on the bias and then I'm sewing 3 pieces together. This is right in the pattern, it has the pattern for you. And then I'm taking the facing of the front of my dress and turning it wrong side out like this and pinning it in place according to the markings on the pattern. And then I took that bias tape that I made and folded it in half and pressed it with the iron. And now I'm lining it up with the neck of my dress and making sure the raw edges match each other and pinning it in place. I've never made any sort of facing like this with a dress, so I thought it was a really clever way to make the facing of the button part of the dress and the neck part of the dress. And I'm just sewing all of this in place with a 5/8 seam allowance. After that, I'm turning everything right side out and then sewing everything in place again. So it's just flipped around on the dress and then I'm sewing it down in place with my sewing machine. And I found this to be very, very well laid out in the pattern and well explained. And I thought it was, again, a really cool way to make the facing and the neck of the dress. We're almost to the end, so I'm doing the hem of the dress and I folded it a 1/2 inch and pressed, and then 2 inches and pressed, and then stitched that in place. I did have to take a full 2.5 inches and cut that right off the length of the dress to make it extra short for my petite self. So just a note, if you're making this and you are shorter, you might want to just alter the pattern at the beginning to do that. And then I'm making the casing for the sleeve. So I just pressed the edges of the sleeve over about 3/4 of an inch. Sewed that, made a casing, and then I'm just pulling some elastic through. There's different measurements for the different sizes, and then I'm stitching the hole that I left shut. So finally, we're near the end now. I am just marking the buttons on the front placket of my dress. So I just used the pattern and I'm just put pins where I'm going to make the buttonholes. and I bought 3/4 inch buttons, so just make sure that you make buttonholes that are the right size for the buttons you used. I just found some plastic buttons at Walmart, and I'm using the buttonhole stitch feature on my sewing machine to make the buttons. So it's just very, very small zigzags, and they go back and forth, up and down. There are automatic buttonholing sewing machines. However, my sewing machine is very, very basic, and I just kind of like doing it by hand like this with my sewing machine. And then I am pinning the other side of my placket of my dress to line up with the buttonholes in preparation for sewing on my buttons. So on my dress there are about 7 buttons. If you're doing a longer dress there would be 8, and then I'm just using a needle and thread and hand stitching my buttons onto the placket of my dress. And then the very final step is I'm taking a seam ripper and just ripping open the holes of the buttonholes that I created so that I can put the buttons in them. And that is it. That is how I sewed this Darling Ranges dress by Megan Nielsen. Here it is on. Something I didn't do is I didn't add the ties on the back. There are a couple little ties because I do want to wear this under a cardigan or a blazer, so I didn't want that lump at the back, so I'm just belting it, and I think that's a really nice look for this dress. I love, love, love the pockets of this dress. I think that's probably my favorite feature. Again, I did have to shorten this quite a bit. If I make this one again, I think I would shorten the bodice 1 to 2 inches as well for my petite figure. If you're petite, you might want to alter the pattern like that too. Love the 3/4 length sleeves. I do really like the neckline. At first I thought it was going to be a little bit low, but once I put the buttons on, I was really, really happy with how this dress looked. Thanks so much for watching this video today. I hope you enjoyed this sew along with me video. Let me know in the comments below if you would ever try to sew this dress. And again, make sure to head on over to Lisa's channel of Farmhouse on Boone. Check out how she sewed her dress. I haven't seen it yet, so I can't wait to see how hers turned out. Thanks again for watching this video. If you like DIY and decor ideas on a budget, subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you guys all in my next video. Bye.